Hello, welcome back to Learn Economia. Today we are going to look onto the topic called deadweight loss of tax. To start with the outline, I'll be first of all introducing the context in which deadweight loss of tax would be happening. Then we will see the meaning of deadweight loss of tax. After that, we'll be looking onto the working mechanism of deadweight loss of taxation by having a graphical explanation of the same. Then we will look onto the factors affecting deadweight loss of tax. After that, we will be seeing the impact as well as implications of deadweight loss of taxation, and finally, we will be concluding the session. Now, to begin with, we could find that government will be having a tendency to impose tax on people, isn't it? So, as far as tax is concerned, the government is having a duty to impose tax on people. So, what is the intention of the government when it imposes tax on the people? When it imposes tax on the people, it will be increasing the revenue of the government. So this is what we can see. So when the government introduces a tax on people, it is intending to have a rise in the revenue of the same. Now let's see how will a tax influence the taxpayer. So let's see the impact of tax on taxpayer. When we talk about taxpayer, we can divide the taxpayers into two categories. One, there would be consumers. And the second category would be the producers. So government can impose tax on both these categories, right? Consumers as well as producers. So let's see how this tax would be affecting consumer and producer. So just think about a commodity tax, a tax on commodity. And the government is imposing such a tax on consumer. This will be increasing the price paid by the consumers. Consumers will be required to pay a higher price in the presence of tax. So they pay a high tax, they pay a high price with tax, and this will be leading to a fall in their welfare. So consumer surplus will be coming down, and for the same reason we could find that the welfare of consumers would be coming down. Let's take the scenario of producers here. As far as producers are concerned, when the government is imposing a tax on these parties, these people also need to pay a portion of their income to the government as tax. So what will happen? When you look on to the actual price received by the producer, they will be receiving less price. So price received in this scenario in the presence of tax would be less, which will be leading to fall in the welfare of producer as a result of fall in their surplus too. Here, consumer surplus and producer surplus would be coming down. Now, what would happen when the consumers feel that as a result of consumption, their welfare is coming down? They will be having a tendency to demand less, so they will be demanding less goods. And here in the scenario of producers also, you could find that they are also having a fall in their welfare, which will make them do supply less. So supply also will be coming down. So demand is coming down and supply is coming down. So in this instance, you could find that the quantity itself is coming down. Quantity itself is coming down. The quantity produced is coming down. The quantity demanded is coming down. So this is a negative kind of scenario, a bad impact, a negative impact, isn't it? So the government was intending to have a positive impact in the form of rise in revenue, but unfortunately, as a result of tax, we could find a distortionary impact, a bad impact or negative impact by having a fall in the welfare of both the consumers and producers, which is making them to demand less and supply less. This is the context of what is called deadweight loss of taxation. So let's see the meaning of the same now. We could find that as a result of tax imposed by the government, consumption came down as well as production came down. So which was a scenario of economic inefficiency. Some kind of distortion was happening in the market. The market was actually moving away from the equilibrium. Not only that, the production as well as consumption came down, isn't it? And not only that, this happens as a result of reduction in the welfare of both consumers as well as producer. So the surplus which was there for the consumer as well as producer came down. That means that though the government was coming up with a new tax, or though the government was trying to increase the existing tax rate with the intention to increase its revenue, it was backfiring. It was leading to something called a reduction of welfare, a reduction in welfare of producers and consumers. So now I told you that the quantity is also coming down, right? The quantity produced is coming down, quantity consumed is coming down. So you know that as far as the total tax revenue of the government is concerned, the tax revenue of the government is concerned, it is the tax times quantity. Tax times quantity. And now quantity coming down means definitely the tax revenue of the government too will be coming down. So the government is also not getting enough revenue out of what it has done. It was having an intention to gain more revenue, but now it's a kind of backfiring situation that we could find. The government too is getting insufficient fund, or the government is not gaining anything extra here. The government revenue is also coming down in that instance due to fall in quantity. So this is the idea of what is called deadweight loss of taxation. The total economy will be in a loss. So the idea is being put forward by the famous economist Alfred Marshall, and he told that the concept and the idea of deadweight loss of taxation would be influenced by different factors, and these factors would be having different working mechanism and different contexts, and we will see that in detailed way in the coming slides. Before that, it's important to look onto the working mechanism of deadweight loss of tax. So we could find that though the government was imposing tax to increase revenue, it was creating an opposite effect because the revenue is falling due to falling quantity, isn't it? If you think from the perspective of a producer in the presence of tax, you could find that tax would be increasing the cost of production of producers. Producers will be having a disincentive to produce more in that context. So definitely the production will be coming down, supply would be coming down, there would be a drop. So here also quantity coming down, and in the case of demand also we have seen earlier. So altogether we could find that as a result of tax, both demand side as well as supply side would be having some kind of distortions. This is what we will be seeing in the form of graphical explanation. So here it is, the working mechanism of deadweight loss of tax by having a graphical representation. For having this graph, you have to take quantity along the x-axis and price along the y-axis. So you will be first of all considering the situation before tax, before the introduction of tax. So for this you need to assume, or you need to take into consideration, a negatively sloping demand curve which is represented as D. So this D or demand curve would be following the typical law of demand scenario, and you have a positively sloping supply curve which is in accordance with the law of supply. Now we have to look onto the equilibrium scenario. You know that when these two curves meet at a particular point or intersect at a particular point, you do have equilibrium. So in this scenario, both these curves are intersecting at this point, point E, and at point E, you could find that there is equilibrium. And this is something which is called a before tax situation. So you will be able to find the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity with this particular point. So to find the equilibrium quantity, from this point you need to draw down in such a way that it will be touching your quantity axis, and now you have an equilibrium quantity QE. So QE is equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium quantity. Okay. Now to find the equilibrium price from this point, you need to draw in such a way that it will be touching your price axis, that is PE here. So PE is the equilibrium price. equilibrium price. So keep these ideas in your mind, because we need to see the change that will be coming as a result of introduction of tax. Let's see that. Let's assume that the government is imposing a tax now. So earlier our equilibrium price was PE and equilibrium quantity was QE, right? Because we were at this particular point at E. Now, with tax, when the government impose a tax, definitely we have seen that this will make the consumers to pay a more price. Consumer will be requiring to pay a higher price. So this will be considered by having a movement from PE to PC. So what is PC? PC is price paid by consumers. Price paid by consumers. And also we have seen that with tax, producers will be getting lesser price only because they will have to pay a part of their revenue or part of their income to the government. So coming to the producer, they will be getting only less price, which is indicated by PP. So PP is the price received by producers. Okay, now we have to consider these scenarios to have some kind of change in this figure. So you have to draw from this point PC in such a way that it will be touching some part on your demand curve. So now you get a point here. Similarly, from the producer's price, you have to draw a line in such a way that it will be meeting some point on the supply curve. Now what you have to do is that just draw a line from this point in such a way that you will be meeting this point. You need to extend this line from here in such a way that it will be meeting your quantity axis, and you are getting something called QT, and this is the quantity after tax. Quantity after tax. So the quantity produced and consumed after tax would be only this much. Earlier it was till QE, but now it is only till QT. That means you could find that the quantity is coming down, isn't it? Now, when the quantity is coming down to QT from QE, what is happening? Now, we could find that producers were getting so much of surplus and consumers were getting so much of surplus. But after tax, producer surplus came down. Producer surplus came down. So the fall in producer surplus is actually indicated by portion C. And what happens to consumer surplus? Consumer surplus also came down. Consumer surplus also came down. So this fall in consumer surplus due to tax is indicated by point A. So this rectangle is the loss of consumer surplus and this rectangle is the loss of producer surplus. Now what is this here? So when this rectangle is the loss of consumer surplus, it will be going to government. So the government will be collecting this as its revenue. Again, coming to portion C, the loss of producer surplus as a result of tax, this will be also taken by the government. The government would be getting this as its revenue. So these two parts A and C would be the government revenue that will be coming as a result of tax. But there are 2 points you will be having here, which is called B and F. Actually, what is so special with B and F is that B shows fall in consumer surplus but not collected by government. not collected by government. The government is not collecting this revenue, this money or this much portion, but it's a fall in consumer surplus. Similarly, F. What is happening to F? Here also you could find that it's a fall in producer surplus but not collected by government. Not collected by government. Why this is happening? Because we are producing only till quantity T. Earlier we were producing till quantity E, right? QE. Now it's only QT. So this area that is represented by B and F. This area or this triangular portion, this area is something that you consider as deadweight loss. Deadweight loss. Why it's a loss? Because if nobody is gaining anything, the consumer is losing, the producer is losing, and also the government is losing. This area is not collected by the government. So everybody is losing. In total, you could find that for the whole economy, it's a loss. That is called deadweight loss. Now let's consider the factors affecting deadweight loss of tax. Firstly, let's consider the concept called price elasticity. So here we have to understand the way in which different entities will be responding to the changes in price. So we have to consider the responsiveness aspect here to the quantity demanded of a commodity as a result of change in price, isn't it? So just think that there is a scenario of an elastic good or a good that is having a price elasticity which is more. So if the price elasticity is more, what happens is that what will happen if the government goes for a tax? If the government goes for a tax for that commodity with more price elasticity, what will happen here is that you will have a tendency to switch over to alternatives, isn't it? So in that instance, the consumption will be happening only with respect to the alternatives. This particular commodity will not be demanded. So for the same reason, the deadweight loss would be very much higher for these elastic goods, isn't it? The next thing, let's consider how tax rate would be affecting the deadweight loss of taxation. In certain cases, tax rate would be high. In certain other cases, tax rate would be low. If tax rates are identified as high, definitely with respect to high tax rate, people would be trying to avoid these taxes because as far as people are concerned, they hate tax because it's a part of the hard-earned revenue of the taxpayer that is given to the government in the form of tax. So people will try to find all the loopholes to avoid tax. So when they go for all the loopholes to avoid tax, what will happen to the revenue of the government? The government's revenue will be lost, or the government's revenue would be coming down. So government would be also having a loss. Government revenue in this instance would be falling. Now let's see how market structure would be influencing the scenario, or how deadweight loss is having some connection with market structure. So we do have different types of market structure, isn't it? We do have duopoly, oligopoly, monopoly kind of things. If it is a monopoly, so what is so special? We are having a single seller. It's a single seller scenario. So when there is only one seller in the market, this person would be capturing the entire market share. This person will be selling to the entire market. And for the same reason, even if the government is imposing some tax on such a commodity, it would be very much difficult for the consumers to avoid something called such tax. It would be very much harder to avoid some unfavorable outcome. People know it very well that a rise in tax would be an unfavorable outcome for them, isn't it? So if you look on to something called rise in tax, it is definitely creating an unfavorable outcome for the taxpayer. But unfortunately, this unfavorable outcome cannot be avoided when it is a monopoly, because you do not have any alternatives to switch over to. Now, what about substitute goods? In the scenario of substitute goods, definitely it will be very much easy for the consumers to switch over to the alternative commodities, and for the same reason, as I was telling you earlier, it will be very significant when you consider the impact of deadweight loss and tax on the original commodity. So just consider that you are having a commodity A, and this commodity A is having some alternatives or some kind of other options available in the market that will be meeting the same use of commodity A, so which can be B, C, D, E and F. So these are the other alternatives that you can have in the market for commodity A. So just assume that the government is taxing commodity A more. So what will people do here? They will not consume good A. Instead, they will switch over to anything called B or C or D or E or F, because they can do that. And for the same reason, the number of consumers who would be consuming A will be almost nil, which will be having a significant impact on this original product called product A. Now, let's consider the impact of deadweight loss. Definitely, efficiency level in the economy would be having a kind of problem, because there would be a loss of efficiency. So the initial equilibrium would be disturbed. So there would be something called distortions in the economy. Some distortionary effect would be created. And definitely you could find that consumers would be changing their behavior. They would be demanding less quantity, and coming to producers, they would also be changing their behavior. They would also be demanding less quantities. Altogether, the quantity would be coming down, isn't it? So these people, the consumers and producers, were going fine with the scenario that was occurring before the introduction of tax, but now, as a result of taxation, they cannot go with the favorable economic activity anymore now. Instead, they will be facing some distortion, and they will be engaging in some bad decisions. They will be going for less production and less consumption, which will be a problematic scenario not only for these categories but also for the entire economy. So what will happen to the market size? I have already told that as a result of tax will lead to fall in quantity. Producers will be producing less, so that you could find that supply would come down, and coming to the buyers or the consumers, they would also be consuming less. So coming to the demand side, that too will come down. So altogether, distortionary effect and negative kind of scenario leading to inefficiency. Inefficiency. This is what would happen. Now, when we say about the impact of tax on producers and consumers, sometimes we might have a tendency to neglect the impact of tax on somebody called the working class workers. So we know that producers, as a result of tax, producers decide to produce less. Producers decide to produce less. Now, if producers are deciding to produce less, what will happen to the demand for laborers? Demand for labor, their demand for labor will be coming down, because anyway you are producing less only. So demand for labor will be coming down. What will it be leading to? It will lead to something called unemployment. So many people will be losing their jobs. That will happen, which will altogether affect the economy. Now, what is the scenario of the government? The government is a victim of this backfiring. The government is having a scenario of fall in its revenue. The government was intending to have a high revenue. That was the main reason why it was going for a rising tax. But unfortunately, the government is not getting a higher revenue here. Instead, it's having a fall in its revenue. So the government too is having a loss. Let's see the implications of deadweight loss of tax now. It is all inefficiency. Tax would be appearing as inefficient in most of the scenario. So that particular tax with more deadweight loss. So when you consider a tax with more deadweight loss, this tax is identified as something called which is inefficient. More deadweight loss with means more inefficient. And in many instances, you could find that the burden of tax could be split between the producer and consumer. So for the same reason, both producer surplus would be coming down and consumer surplus would be coming up. It will be having a very bad impact on the economy altogether. So both the producers and consumers will be having a scenario fall in the welfare. Definitely, this will be leading to smaller market size because the quantity demanded and supplied would be falling. Again, you could find that policymakers can definitely go for some options to minimize this deadweight loss of taxation. So what can they do? They need to ensure that whenever they set some tax rate, it should be optimal enough. This is something that we can do, but some tax rate that is optimal for one economy might not be optimal in some other economy. That is something which is different, which we need to take into consideration when we go for fixing some tax rate for every economy. And also, the tax base could be broadened. And also, you need to ensure that there have to be some less administrative and compliance cost of taxation. So, these will make something called equity as well as efficiency aspect. Equity and efficiency aspect can be ensured. We have to ensure that there is something called the idea of fairness followed. There is something called the ability to pay aspect followed whenever government goes for imposing some taxation. So all this can be taken into consideration to reduce the deadweight loss of taxation. So yes, I have already told you the efficiency and equity aspect. So this is something that we need to deal with: fairness, ability to pay, and so on. So all these are certain kind of tips that we can use to reduce the deadweight loss of taxation. So otherwise, if the tax is inefficient or inequitable, it will be leading to several issues. So in short, we could find that as far as deadweight loss of taxation is concerned, it is still a debated topic. Though tax is something that is important to increase the revenue of the government should strike a balance. Here, the government cannot go for something called unlimited tax. If the government is going for the same, definitely that will make the government to have only less revenue. So, though this is a debated topic, definitely we have to understand that if we follow the idea of equity and efficiency criteria, we will be able to arrive at some productive aspect of productive situation with tax. So, otherwise, no consensus is there, which is based on what is the accurate measurement of optimality. So tax system, definitely we can try to ensure that this could be made to an extent free from the deadweight loss scenario, but in most of the scenario it might not be completely free from deadweight loss aspect, but still we can try our level best to ensure that we follow some efficiency and equity criteria to reduce the impact of deadweight loss of tax. That is all for today. You can download the Learn Oikonomia app where you will be getting previous year question papers and answers, free study materials, live as well as recorded classes, and free MCQ based weekly tests. What you have to do is just download it. I'll be giving you the link in the description box. And also you can join our free Telegram community for making discussions. For this also I'll be providing the link in the description box. That's it. Thank you for watching. You can like, share and subscribe our channel for more such videos.